JLL leads on this. Thank you. So we have Robert Kingham, who is Director of Living Capital Markets Higher Education, and David Stevens, Associate Living Capital Markets Higher Education. Right, so without further ado, I will hand you over to Robert.
Thank you, Jan. Nice to see you all. For those, I know a few people on the call, so hello to those I know. For those who don't, I lead the higher education team at JLL, and over the last 5 years, we've been leading quite a few student housing partnerships for various universities. So we've been knee deep in specifications and what's good and what's bad. So this is a lovely idea to sort of do. My colleague David, I'll let you say a few words because David's come to the dark side from university world.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm David Stevens. I work with Robert at JLL. Again, I know a number of you through the CUBO conferences that I was previously a member like you. I was 15 years at University of London looking after the intercollegiate halls there, and then Deputy Director of Estates, and then moved over to join Robert in 2017.
So we both have strong opinions about what works and what doesn't, as I'm sure you all do. So talking to me, Janet and Gagan sort of initiated this idea. It'd be useful to try and capture this and use the sort of CUBO membership to try and boil down some of the great ideas that are sort of sifting around through all the projects that have been going on. So it potentially could be quite a big task. So what we thought we'd do, and hence the reason for these roundtables, is try to think about how to make it digestible, how to sort of capture that information. We don't want to subject CUBO members to sort of survey fatigue. I'm sure there are enough of those. So we want to try and design it in a way that we get them, it's easy to fill in and we get the best response, and it's useful for everybody. So in a minute, I'll share my screen, and I said this is the thing that we sent round, just a sort of one pager trying to capture some of our initial thoughts, which we'll put up, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts on. But in general, the principle was to think about how to sort of design and scope a survey that really focuses on the student experience. So we're deliberately not going into all of the details on specification and arguing about which air source heat pump is best, or things that are sort of back of house, and architects and M&E consultants can gleefully sort of mull over. It's more about the stuff that you're experiencing in terms of what's working and what's not working for student experience. So if I share my screen, let's see if the technology allows me to do that. Can you see my screen? Hang on. All nodding. Jan can. You can. Fantastic. If I move, let's move you over here. So on the left in the red box, we've just reminding everyone of what was on the invite in terms of the overarching ideas on what we're trying to do with this survey. We also thought it would be useful just to put on screen, and that's in the sort of the tannish box at the bottom, the elements that we think are worth considering. You'll note, as I mentioned, these are all of the student-facing type elements that we always sort of debate and mull over with our university client teams and architects and student unions and the like. So these are the sort of key things. But of course, we'll be grateful for your thoughts on, is there anything that's missing there that we really need to talk about? And then above then, we've just got a few thoughts on some of the bigger questions that we think need asking. So I'll go through this quickly, and then really wanted to open up to everyone to chip in with how we can sort of sculpt this to make it better before we go out. And we've got another one next week, haven't we, Jen? So we've got another group similarly sort of chipping in with their thoughts. So by the end of this, I think we should have something that's that works for the great majority. So the main question that we want to ask is really about the insights that members can share about the approaches that work and they don't work. And I'm a little bit cautious about doing a survey that just gets data back, because if we have information that says so many people like like a shower tray and so many people like a wet room. It's of limited use. I mean, it's interesting, but it's a limited use without that qualitative discussion behind it about, well, why does it work? Why doesn't it work? What have you tried? What haven't you tried? What's been the feedback? So we've sort of mentioned student feedback as being a really important thing here, and I'm sure you've all had plenty of that that can sort of start to sort of focus this specification. So it's really about sort of, well, what's been tried, what's been tested, and what's the experience that the rest of the group can then benefit from. That's the main thing. I think the other things that we're quite interested in, and I'm sure there are other questions which I'll open up the floor in a minute. There's a point about, well, what are these are just about aesthetic design and what are actually critical to getting that experience right. There might be some things that are open to different subjective preferences, but there might be some things that if you get it wrong, then you hear about it and you regret that decision. So what are those? Also, of course, we talk about the student experience, but students are diverse, and you're catering for a very diverse population. So there may be some elements which we think are game changers for certain cohorts, whatever they are, but others aren't too bothered about. So obviously accessibility is the obvious one, and some of that is of course captured in building regulations and guidance, but there'll be some good practice that we'll want to capture as well. But there are other things, neurodivergence among students isn't particularly captured in the existing sort of Equality Act. That's only just emerging as an area to sort of think carefully about. Size, we're talking about size of students. Obviously, if you're talking about beds, if you've got a 6'1" student, they're going to have a different opinion, I think. So that's something we often come across. The next point about longevity, we're really interested to hear about how about how everyone's attacked the problem of how long a life cycle are you giving to these elements, and are you specifying higher in order to increase that life cycle? Does it work, or do you end up with things that feel a bit institutional? Is that always the decision you're having to make? The next point is it should be an interesting point about life cycle spend. I think I can't see the screen from me. I think we've got a few members from the private sector. Have we got on the call, or is it just universities? Jen, you'll be able to tell me that. But this is something that obviously you want to sort of bring the private sector into comment on, as well as university members. Is, well, should we take into account that we've often seen universities taking a different approach to life cycle than the ones we would sort of bake into a long-term partnership deal? And that may be simply a function of your finance directors being rather tight on the purse strings when it comes to these projects. So are there factors like that that influence the choice of specification? There's another point about who else is it for. So if you're minded to let rooms over the summer, does that change the way of thinking about what you're offering? Or can you design? Can we design something that works for a variety of tenants? The other thing we thought of doing, which we're really interested in, is we've listed all the elements below, and clearly there'll be some views on the best way of solving each of those. But it's also, we'd really like to hear, well, what's important and what's less important. And we think that's probably changed over the last 5-10 years. The desk is a good example. Now so much learning has gone online. Is the desk as vital a piece of element in the room as it was, say, 10 years ago? And the last one we're particularly interested in is dead space, that bit as you come in, the corridor next to the ensuite. What do you do with it? What's the best way of dealing with that and making the most of it? So I'll shut up now and open it up to the floor, and it'll be really, really interesting. Jan, you might want to sort of chip in and share and provoke if I'm sure there'll be opinions flooding forth, but it'd be great to hear about members' thoughts on how we could sculpt this further.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, for the purposes of having the discussion, whether we should take the screen share down, or
Let's
is
do
it
that.
helpful?
Yeah, how do I
To have it there? Hopefully
Paul
people
share?
have got that document. We can always reshare.
Hang on. Stop share. Sorry, got it.
Okay, so looking for initial responses to this, do you see anything that you think is pertinent that isn't there? And how do you feel? Paul Harris. Hi.
Morning, everyone. Put several things in the chat already, not necessarily omissions, but other things to think about. Obviously, in terms of the fundamental design, certainly for new build, how many people sharing? That's, you know, whether it's a cluster flat with its own kitchen, living room, whether it's a block, you know, 500 people sharing a common room the size of you and I's living room isn't necessarily the way forward. But equally, there's plenty of common rooms across the land that are barely used. So, you know, I think that's another big area for debate as well. I think, you know, there was reference to obviously summer trade, which is clearly a consideration for lots of institutions, but also, you know, what is your core student market? What course are they doing? You know, if you're a school of art and everyone's turning up with 6 foot wide drawing boards, you've clearly got to factor that into your room design, but that's going to be unique to schools of art and so on. I think, you know, the desk thing is a really interesting one. My, you know, my kids are teenagers. They're not quite at university, but, you know, they've quite commonly got, you know, a mobile phone streaming something, a tablet streaming something else, and concurrently trying to do their homework, all balanced on their pillow. You know, they've got a desk, but they don't use it. So, you know, I think that's something to be mindful for. But again, it's horses for courses, and there will be students who fundamentally want a desk, and people who will want multiple screens spread along their desk so they can I haven't quite got the technical capability to start dragging things from one screen to the other. I haven't quite got my head around the advantages of it yet, but I know plenty of people do that. So there's some starters.
That's great. And we're capturing all this, by the way. We've got it recorded, but it's also we're jotting down notes as we go. So thank you for that.
Other feedback and comments? Jane, I can see you. You're on mute at the moment.
I say I'm not sure what the takeaway is today, that Paul's kids are getting to the age of university life, because I met Paul about 20 odd years ago and he hadn't even got kids then. So that's quite a scary thought for a Friday. But we still look youthful, Paul, we're all right. No, I think it's interesting. I mean, I didn't realise it was about a discussion document. I thought you were going to show us a little bit more about what you're doing in the future. I think it's about that quality. It's the quality about across all your accommodation, because here at Sheffield, we've got just short of 6,000 beds, but we've got 4 different providers. I think it's keeping that quality across the board. 4,000 of our beds are on a PFI, which is a massive challenge with life cycle, because they life cycle it along like what they would do at school, not potentially a student bedroom. So I think there's quite an interesting piece about what's life cyclable. And I think what I did notice on your slide, there's nothing there about environmental. And I think one of the things with the life cycle is the environmental, because it's all well and good saying that a mattress is 7 years, but then you throw 1,000 mattresses out in that 1 year. Well, actually half of them are probably okay for another couple of years. So I would always be, we're getting further and further away from that kind of idea that something lasts X, because it might not. And if you've had a load of students in and a load of conference guests, your mattresses are definitely not going to last 7 years because they've had twice as much use. So that's one of our big things. And I think we're looking now at how we refurbish 1990, 2000 builds, but it's that, what do you do? And you talk there about it being quite institutionalized. One of my biggest bugbears, you walk into a kitchen, the first thing you see is a Henry. You know what I mean? It's fine, it's practical, but it's not really very welcoming, is it? I mean, how many students are going to probably use it? We've also got now a difference where we've gone from carpet to Antico, which is wonderful, but actually that's now causing us more problems with cleaning, whereas a carpet can absorb some of the students' I was going to say dirt and grime, but Antico needs a bit more attention and a bit more love. And it does start the furry bits crawling up the corners and in the corridors. So that's added another kind of challenge, should I say. And then I've just made a few other things. That was interesting what Paul was saying about common rooms. Our rooms are quite small, but actually in the future, should rooms be bigger, do the students want more of their own room to invite people into their own space, or are they still quite happy to go to a corridor, down the corridor, through the stairs and meet up in groups? We have quite a lot of common room space. Some of it is used, but more as a study space now we're finding, rather than collecting together to play games or whatever they want to do. So yeah, and desks, an interesting one. You can take them out because everyone's sitting on the beds, which comes back down to mattress use. But we're finding the desks are multifunctional, because quite often they'll eat their dinner there, or it'll be their makeup zone or their gaming area. It might not be no longer their study space, but we're finding the desks are still quite in demand. And that was just another thing. And I think what Paul was hinting about, we struggle to let the 12-bed flats now. 12 students sharing a cluster flat, it doesn't seem to be, they seem to like that 6 or 8. They like 8 because 8 gives them 2 hobs, 2 ovens, and 6 just gives them 1 hob and 1 oven. So we get quite a lot of demand now for students wanting 8 beds because they know they're going to get twice as much. So in theory, you've got 4 sharing each of those areas, whereas if in your flat 6, you've only got the 6. So yeah, I mean, we've been trialing in a kitchen of 10, only putting a dining table in for the size of 10, but putting 8 chairs around it, because invariably we'd find that not 10 students all eat together. So I think it's an interesting time, and I always worry, we've got the cinema room, which seemed to be the thing that everyone was building 5 or 6 years ago. But what's the new 5 or 6 year going to be demand? And I think that's the quite interesting one.
The point about, Jane, thanks for that. And the point about floor coverings is just really interesting, because that's counterintuitive, you know, unless you've tested that, you would think the opposite, you know, you would think, well, you know, carpet's going to be harder to clean. And actually, that's something you've been through, and you can sort of give it, and that, I think that kind of insight is really valuable. You don't get that from browsing product specifications, you get it from experience. Yeah,
and I think the carpet thing is also soundproofing, because carpet will take a lot of sound out, whereas Antico, if depending on your build, does just kind of move the bit of the sound around a bit more. I mean, the students love it, but what the problem is, we're getting everything with Antico, so there's no other choice, and it's just all feels a bit clinical.
And the point about cinemas, I'm just trying to sort of phrase that. I mean, I think that is the question around, well, what is the next thing that would help to knit that community and create that communal experience? Is that the sort of broader question we're asking, or would you put it a different way?
No, I think that's right. I mean, I've been in this job long enough to know that en-suites were the desire. We got them. Then it was gyms was the desire. We got them. Then it was cinema rooms. We've got them. And the thing is what's the next desire? And is that communal, or is it something more personal, or is it more internet or whatever? But I just think everyone now has all those. So what's going to be the next big motivator for students to come to your accommodation rather than somebody else's?
Paul.
So I think just coming back on that, I was going to type it, but my personal view, and we're seeing this on campus where we've just done a load of what we call agile areas, both for working and students. I think blocks with communal study spaces. So they're kind of soundproof pods for anything from kind of 2 to 6, 8, 10 people, because frankly, we've got loads of those on campus and they're full all day, every day, with people wanting to work. And, you know, obviously they've got to have the super fast Wi-Fi and all of that kind of thing. But, you know, obviously the ability to come out of your room, not just see your flatmates, but not go out into the elements, go and find, you know, one of these soundproof pods or little meeting rooms or whatever, nice glass sliding doors, super fast Wi-Fi, possibly a large screen you can connect up to and all of that kind of thing. And it obviously brings the benefits that have possibly been missed in the pandemic of bouncing ideas off each other, getting your presentation finessed and all of that kind of business. Clearly not space that adds value in terms of the crude rental though. So, you know, there's a kind of development equation in the background there as well.
So for those pods, Paul, and question for everyone, do you think it matters where the accommodation is? I.e., would you provide it if it was bang on campus, or is it more important if it's a bit of a distance from campus? Does it matter?
Probably not, would be my gut instinct, but I don't know. I mean, I guess further away it might become more important because people would be less likely to use the general on-campus facilities. But yeah, as I say, we've seen common rooms that traditionally started with table football, a screen for PlayStation and a pool table, now start having these little breakout study spaces, mini libraries, that kind of thing. And they're very, very popular, and the table football was probably used by 4 people for a couple of weeks as a bit of a novelty, and it looks good on your marketing photo, but then does it really add value to the entire populace for the whole year? I guess is the question we should be asking ourselves.
I had a question for everyone about, are there particular bugbears that you have where you just don't feel that of all the things you've tried, you haven't come to you haven't got a satisfactory solution to a particular element? Are there things, might not be on that list, but things that you just really annoy you?
Can I just thanks all. I mean, it's quite interesting to hear the challenges we all are facing at the moment. I think the biggest challenge I see when I start looking at accommodation, there's a lot of specs we are seeing across the board. So we just talked about, like, people are looking for what's the next big thing. And I was wondering whether that's the right question at one stage, because is a cinema a big thing, or a study space, or a booth? Nobody knows. But one thing I know for sure, whatever space we are giving, we're asking for more and more flexibility. So why a communal area can't be a cinema theater or a study space? Why a booth can't have a small whiteboard where they can quickly write their ideas, and which can be used as a projector screen if need to be? So I think the more we are looking at these areas, they need to be multifunctional throughout the year. Study time, they need to study. When they're out of exam, they want to have a bit of fun. You need to meet that need as well. The third I was looking at is there's a right balance between standard specs across the board and giving that persona to that building. Whether we have a standard spec for most of the stuff, but where the color and accent color comes into play and start giving that look and feel and individuality to the building. Those are sort of thought process going through our sort of discussions with my colleagues at the moment. I mean, if you walk, I mean, you mentioned, Jane, 1992, I think some of our accommodations from 1960s. And when you walk through, even the carpet changes from one floor to other. And the very strange colors sometimes, because we have so much individual input into those projects. We lost the whole history of that now. So one is to refurbish them. It makes it easy for us so we can manage the cost of it, but then there's no persona to building. I've seen kitchens like in 6 different colors now, where 1 or 2 might do, or 3 might do. So there's a lot to think about it. And now thanks for starting the discussion as well.
Please do either chip in, by the way, everyone, or put there's the little raise your hand thing if you prefer. So I'm going to keep throwing questions out there, but if I move on too quickly, please do go back to things that you don't think have been covered. I did want to. Oh, Richard.
I'll throw something at you. You've talked a lot about student experience, and it's something that has just come to the fore that we are now seriously considering for a 7-year program, a refurb around what we call our 1990s. I think we're probably all in the same boat with that sort of generation of stock, and that is actually around the carbon impact, A, of the refurb, and B, of the operation of it subsequently, because that is a significant interest to students. So we are actually considering that almost being the defining factor of how we do the refurb and what the provision looks like. And that will potentially determine things like room size, heating, types of furniture, etc., etc. Can we get that block or blocks that we do in the next couple of years to carbon neutral and be able to sell them as carbon neutral? And I think that's a really different way of approaching this project. And it's something we hadn't thought about till recently, till actually an M&E colleague raised that. So we don't take any particular credit for it, but I think it's an interesting USP. Well, maybe not as USP now I'm telling you all, but point being that I think it's just how the students then approach their choice of halls, because we know that's something they're asking about their academic courses. So we think that's something that we can be talking to them about and offering them. We think that'll be quite popular.
We're currently working on a 1,000-bed net zero carbon scheme, which is tricky because it's, as you know, construction costs are rather eye-watering at the minute with construction inflation. So with the added sort of requirement for net zero carbon, it's looking quite, it's not quite viable yet. We need to do lots of value engineering to make sure it works. So Richard, one question I had for you based on what you've just said is, do you think students, this is for everyone of course, do you think students are willing to sacrifice anything in order to live in a low carbon environment? I'm thinking of
short answer, yes. I think it's something that will potentially tip the balance for them. Now, what I can't tell you yet is whether the pricing will be the same, the pricing will be more, pricing might be less. I don't know, because we've not worked all the way through that business case. Yeah, and some of those carbon reduction things might be, yes, they get less servicing. There is less weight, there's grade recycle, whatever it might be. But I think students are looking for that differential and looking for that kind of information. And our experience is probably price is not the driver.
Does anyone else have any, that's such a good point. Does anyone else have any sort of insight or questions on that aspect? If not, I wanted to ask about specific cohorts. I mentioned obviously accessibility generally, but neurodivergence is another one. Paul's mentioned art students. Are there other sort of groups of students we ought to think about? Well, they've got a different a set of different needs that we need to sort of try to work in somehow. Tall students, the other ones I mentioned.
It was rowers back in my day.
Yes. What do rowers need then? What do rowers particularly need?
Very, very white cleaned flooring, lots of space to be hanging things up, and massive beds.
So, I mean, from our side of things, it's more about the student communities now. We do get a bit of pushback from vegan and vegetarian students sharing fridges. We haven't cracked that one yet. I think the universities we're starting quiet areas. I'm not sure how quiet it's going to be because the accommodation is not particularly quiet anyway, just because of the building noise and stuff. So is there something we need to be? But the more you then put it into groups, the difficult it is then to commercially let it, because if you've got 1,000 quiet rooms and you don't get 1,000 students, then that doesn't work. But I think there's some lifestyle choices that we're going to have to start considering as we move forward in the next future planning. But I don't know what they are. We get a big demand for cycles. I don't know why in Sheffield with all the hills, but maybe that's because it keeps them fit. But I think it is one for universities to start considering more, thinking of that environmental impact that the students feel they're having, and the fact that the government want us all to get on a bike now. So yeah, that would be our only thoughts at the moment.
Can I ask, what about delivery? How are you, Matt? Because that's increasing, isn't it? And I know during the sort of online ordering and so on, and during the pandemic, we had some supplies being delivered direct to accommodation, others going to central points. Is accommodation tending to take that up now? Or how is that organised on your campus? Anyone? Richard's got his hand
we
up.
really struggle with it. It's Cambridge is quite a small landlocked campus, and frankly, we don't let delivery vehicles on. They can drop stuff at goods inwards, but that invariably means them having to wait for the student to come over and sign. And in some instances, they won't even do that. They'll just drive off again and say, you're going to have to pick it up from somewhere else. We haven't got access points year round. We obviously have special arrangements for arrival, but the Ocado man or whoever it is can't just drive and drop at the door. Even pizza deliveries, certainly overnight, where the campus is secured to the main front entrance by security, have to be met at the front doors. Whereas Chelmsford, completely different campus, obviously the same institution, they can drive onto the student village, drop stuff at the door, ring the doorbells and all the rest of it. So, again, unique to institutions, but I think, even for the wider communities, the ability to get deliveries and Amazon drops and, various institutions do have the lockers and all the rest of it. I'm sure there will be residential blocks that have, whether it's lobby bound or external Amazon lockers and all of that, but it's absolutely something that's got to be factored in, isn't it? The last 2 years have shown us that.
Richard, I think you had your hand up.
I did, and a number of points have been covered there, but I think I was going to thank Jan actually, because that's given me a good food for thought, that is something we do need to factor in. We have similar campus where, a boulevard type arrangement with that don't allow vehicles, and yes, you see students coming out in their pajamas to get their Dominoes, and it obviously depends on the deliverer, depends on the student, depends on often actually can they find the address because they probably all got similar postcodes. And actually all that whole mixture of how do we do that better, because it's definitely something that will only ever increase, I think.
And I wanted to ask about the life cycle question, about how we should be thinking about that, because obviously David and I do a lot of on-campus DBFO style projects where that life cycle is sort of set at the very start of the project. It's baked in, it's financed, and it's ring fenced, which of course is a luxury we know that many universities don't have, and that's that life cycle fund is possibly gets ransacked for other good causes quite frequently. So is that a sort of issue we ought to be trying to think about in some different way, in terms of how much you can spend on ongoing, and that influencing your initial specification of what you're going to put in there? It's not a problem. You've all got loads of money, so no.
We certainly haven't got lots of money, but I think my guiding principle I work to right from the get-go of a specification is trying to make something that's bomb-proof. So it gives us as long a lifespan as possible, with then it's up to us when we change it, rather than the other way around, us needing to change it, if that makes sense. So that actually it may last 10 years, that's great, but it may fall out of fashion in 5 and we can make an outright choice to change something. But I think I would always err towards the try and spend a little more upfront, get the longevity, so that, and I'm talking particularly where this is a university funded project, not a typically sort of third party or PFI type thing, that we would not be under immediate pressure to have life cycle funds available, because universities typically aren't great at doing that.
Mm-hmm. Out of interest, Richard. Sorry, I was just going to say, out of interest, have you noticed any difference? Because I believe you've got St Mary's, which is on City Heart income strip type partnership arrangement, and you've got your own campus. Do you notice a difference in approach on that?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, university budgets are constantly under pressure, and therefore there's very limited life cycle available, if any.
Yeah.
And certainly when there are challenges financially within institutions, that's one of the budgets that will come under pressure, because there's nothing inherently wrong. Things are functional and statutory wise okay, but not, not critical maintenance, as it were. Whereas where you've got a life cycle agreement in place, there is an expectation that it is used. What we found with that particular project is that, as James was saying, actually the model was designed originally, but actually we're not really sticking to it, because some things are lasting far longer and others are not. So we're being more flexible and we're constantly reviewing the model, but the difference is we are still spending money, and there is a pot of cash there to use to keep things ticking over.
And Richard, the stuff that you've described as sort of specifying as bomb-proof, does that also tick all your other boxes in terms of, something that's perhaps not institutional, it gives a good feel to the place, or is that a bit of a
I think the art is in the design. You want it to look high spec, but often it's about being creative how your people design it for you, so that you get that visual appeal, but you also get that robustness that you want, that will last you the length of time you want it to last. So I'll give you a brief. When we refurbished other buildings, we've said, look, go for the high end. We want it to look high end, but it's got to be prison style bomb proof. And that is a real art in itself. And that's something that designers, if you give them that brief, you go away and say, okay, make that work. And I think that is something that we have used quite effectively elsewhere. Now, it does also link to things like cleaning and maintenance. The more, I would say the more of that you can do, the longer you will obviously get your stuff to last. But the reality is it gives you options down the road as to perhaps that life cycle might extend a bit further.
So I'm just laughing at this chat in the chat about PJ. So insights into student lifestyle there. Are there other questions that you think we should be asking in when we're when we get to send around this survey? Thing that we're not covering. Paul.
My only query is kind of what are we missing post-COVID? And I haven't got an answer to that. Obviously, office space, there's a big issue around ventilation. With some of our 90s buildings, we still have issues with ventilation, restricted window opening, too hot in the summer, all of this kind of thing. Obviously, if we did go down the route of having the study spaces and big communal spaces and all the rest of it, it's clearly got to be factored in there. But as I say, we've got to try and stargaze at what we are missing. And obviously we're looking at potentially a period of growth and expansion with more 18-year-olds coming through the system, the reopening of international markets. I know for my institution, EU remains a big kind of question mark. I think the other thing that only has peripheral impact, but we're looking at more shorter term students as well. Now, does that have an impact on what they want their room to be like? In other words, if you just to speculate, if you're there for a shorter period of time, one term, for example, would you be happy with a 9-meter room, not a 12 or 14-meter room? And again, it links to the communal spaces and the various other things. But, I put lots of other things in the chat that I'm sure you've seen. One of my bugbears is the inability for suitcases to disappear, and they spend the whole year kind of sticking out from under the desk or balanced on top of a wardrobe or whatever.
Yeah, I was interested. Sorry, Paul, can I just jump in on that point? Because this is something that I'm wondering if it's going to turn round like it did with gyms. So when I first started in student accommodation, it was out came your risk assessment, and you start ripping out all your gyms because you were worried about liability and everything else. And then that problem then some years later got solved and gyms have all come back in. Is the trunk room or a sort of a storage area for flats outside of the room something that is going to return, which previously got down because you didn't want students using steps to put things on racks and that kind of thing?
From my point of view, I don't think so, because what I notice now is that the modern student comes with 3 or 4 cases, and that's where the problem comes. And putting them in the trunk room was great when they had 1 case and they probably didn't do it, but because they're all going weekend breaking or visiting friends, I think they need more access. I mean, we still got it underneath the bed, which is working really well still, but we've got that luxury. But I suppose it depends on the setup of your accommodation. If you've got 300 beds with 1 reception, a trunk room's fine, but we've got 12 or 14 different blocks in different areas all dotted around. So I think it depends on how your property's built. I mean, for us, our other consideration, Hannah's on the call today, we're just looking at now is a bit what Richard's saying about bomb proofing. We're looking at now whether we should be putting commercial fridge freezers in, because the actual ones that are being bought from just a standard domestic are not big enough and they're not functioning. Would we get better life cycle on that? And also, I think the other one we've probably skipped over again today is still the old one where it's dishwashers and washer dryers in the flats as well. And that's another nut that we haven't really cracked. It's great we've got circuit and everyone's got circuit, but the students are always moaning about the price, location, moving around, having to go out in the cold to get there. And I think that's something else when you start about the kitchens, it's that white goods as well. So just as a final comment.
Yeah, and sorry, Paul, I interrupted you. So please jump back into your other points.
I've forgotten what they were now, but I'm just
sorry about that.
General observations as well. It was just about post-COVID. What are we missing? You know, I mean, depending on the size of the scheme, and if it's new build, you've obviously got to look at the public realm, some outdoor social spacing, some sports facilities, and all the rest of it. But clearly, if you're on campus next door to that, that all becomes irrelevant. But you know, I'm having discussions at the moment about effectively a brand new campus in Peterborough. And, you know, 4 or 5 academic blocks, some associated residential accommodation and all the rest of it. And nobody had thought about the public realm at all, or the proximity of sports facilities and all the rest of it. There was lots of, we're right by the city centre, but that was a kind of bit of a curveball that's now getting some consideration, quite rightly. But as I say, I can't solve the what's next after COVID. We can only kind of speculate, can't we? But you know, I guess the whole kind of notion of isolation and all the rest of it, institutions grappled with, you know, if people are positive, do you start moving them to an isolation area? I think that fairly quickly went away. But the only other thing is whether you factor in as part of new builds, almost guest suites, guest rooms. You know, is there a market that you've got your 400 block student thing, but, you know, every weekend some friends or family or whatever would be happy to pay 35 quid a night and come and stay in the block in their own room? You know, I don't think that's anything many institutions have moved into. Some people, you know, some of the big boys have got their own hotels on site and all the rest of it, but within a student block, is there scope for some you know, guest accommodation, as it were, which then could also be isolation accommodation, could be various other things and all the rest of it. That's just another curveball to think about.
And another thing that crossed our mind is for you know, this survey going out from CUBO. Clearly, our first thought was to sort of tap into all the knowledge that yourselves and your other colleagues in the sector will have on all these burning issues. But is it of interest, of value, to open this up to some students as well? Would any of your institutions sort of value that? Would that be helpful, do you think?
Absolutely, but it's who and how. You know, clearly student unions are the stereotypical bridge between the institution and the student populace, but you know, it's getting engaged and relevant participation, I guess. So, but yeah, I mean, I've certainly got some contacts within the SU at my place, and I'm sure the university colleagues on the call have. We're trying to engage as part of an ongoing kind of strategic review of residencies to 2027. You know, how we would like to grow and what the student wants, and obviously their voice is critical in that. And you know, we obviously do our annual surveys as well, several times a year surveys of arrivals, departures, and a mid-year changeover one. So you know, there may be snippets that come in out of that. I mean, frankly, the main issue at my place is concerns about ever tiring stock, which I know I'm not unique in the land having to deal with that, but it's, you know, how you you know, put a new coat of makeup on something without completely refurbishing it effectively.
Well, I mean, I'll turn to Jan and Sarah on the practicalities. I doubt there'll be a problem in sort of opening, having the survey opened up to, you know, to SU teams and groups. Gagan.
If I could just say,
sorry, Jan.
I wonder if what's actually interesting is sort of FE level as well. It's the students that are coming in. You know, people have been talking about what is the next thing. So you can ask the people having the experience about, but you can also ask the people planning to come in the next couple of years what they're expecting. I don't know how big we can go on this, but I just think there are 2 different cohorts there potentially to talk to. So Richard and Gagan, I'm not sure who was next.
I think if you open this up to students, you have to have a big enough sample size to make it worthwhile. You have to be very careful as well how you phrase the questions, because inevitably accommodation will never be cheap enough, big enough, or plush enough. And that becomes a moot point then, and actually confuses the rest of perhaps what you're trying to achieve. So I think proceed with some caution, and bearing in mind the scale of other student surveys that exist and things like the cost survey, etc., you might dilute what you actually can achieve by doing that.
Yeah, I mean, our thoughts behind it were potentially to do it just on the areas where we're sort of thinking about the relative importance of certain aspects of the room, and the sort of questions of, would you prefer a larger bathroom with a smaller bedroom, or a smaller bathroom with a larger bedroom, and that sort of thing, almost like a survey, a very brief survey monkey to mark importance. So we've got that as a snapshot that goes alongside all the anecdotal information that we get from the experts in the field, if you know what I mean.
Point I was going to try to make is, I think we should involve students. It's just at what stage. We should, if we give a blank piece of paper, I think we generally don't get anything out of it. It's so confusing. So if you go with sort of pick the best from the sector first, and then go to the next stage or step 3, that'll add value. And I think your point, Paul, around sort of temporary accommodation or short-term accommodation next to it, it was in a couple of discussions with my colleagues across the sector. And there's rising demand for part-time courses at the moment, where people only come for few weeks or 1 week to study, and then they go, and it's not enough there. So maybe another potential to look at. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking at the clock. Is there anything else, Jan, that you wanted to cover? I think
we've got a huge amount from this. It's been really helpful, everyone. Thank you. Just looking at the chat, Paul's question about en suites, always having en suites and so on. The other big issue at the moment is affordability, and there is that kind of tension between student accommodation specifications and what's actually affordable. It depends what it means to a student. What's your minimum for actually studying successfully, and what's the lowest cost you could have that at, really. So I agree that if you ask students about everything they would like, you get a kind of wish list, but that's only half the question, really, for us, isn't it? The other side of it is, what does it cost to provide that? So I don't really have anything else to add at this point, but just to kind of be aware when we talk about also, having that those different price points for student, the range of accommodation available. I think that's also important to maintain some choice as well.
That's right, yeah, because our discussions are on the similar sort of scale. We need a budget accommodation right to a luxury accommodation, because every student can pay a different amount of money, and the older where everybody is treated as same, no matter what amount they're paying is gone in coming market. So I think if you look at the rise of apartments for students sort of thing, that's clearly that people can pay more. How we get approval from university bodies, it's a challenge, but another one to pick up in some other discussion. No, thanks.
Brilliant. Unless, Jan, you've got anything else to do, I just want to say thanks for all your time. That's been really fascinating, so and very helpful indeed. So thank you all, and nice to see you, and hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks everybody very much. As I say, we've got another session with a different group of members next week, and then we will review what we've gathered and move forward with plans for the survey. So thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.